Thanks, MediaPost, for making this happen. It's good to see people live, even if they're walking out. I guess they're getting... guys, between me and the breakfast bar or the little bar there, I'll be brief, trust me. What we thought we'd do today is leave you guys with some insights about something we've been talking about ad nauseum probably for the last 6 months in the auto category, and that is the EV market. We're going to just dive right into sort of who the next EV buyer is, but I wanted to give you guys some insights so when you're talking to your customers, you have something to go off of in terms of who's buying, where they're buying, and what's actually happening in the marketplace. So this is going to be pretty quick to go through. If you've been living under a rock, you might not have known that EV registrations are at record highs right now. At Experian, we're kind of unique because we collect all the registration data. We have a lot of marketing data from the consumer side of the business. In addition, we also have all the credit data you could ever imagine under our umbrella. So we get a chance to look at a lot of things a little differently. This is just really our new electric vehicle retail registrations. What no one really talked about so far today is sort of where all this stuff is happening. You can see in California, it's shaded all the way on your left. That's the market leader in terms of states. But the East Coast is where we saw the largest amount of registrations the past year. You saw a little bit in the Midwest. Chicago, Illinois was probably the largest of the Midwest. But what's really interesting for you guys to understand as marketers is the flyover states, very little registration. Part of that's due to lifestyle. Part of that's due to the fact that there's probably more range envy around driving. If anyone's actually been to South Dakota or North Dakota, these are not small states. It takes you 4 hours just to go back and forth to the supermarket. But what's really interesting now is we identified the top DMAs outside of California. What was interesting about that is we saw this really interesting band of registrations south from Florida all the way out to Denver and Colorado and into the Arizonas. Some of this is population movement, which was pretty significant over the last year or two. But more importantly, we're just starting to see adoption, and most of that population movement has happened from the West or the East Coast into these pockets. So it was really interesting. As marketers, though, this just tells you sort of what's happened. What's really important is sort of where the growth is coming from. And we identified the fastest growing DMAs for new EV retail registration. I'm glad to see people are taking pictures because this is actually, we just ran this just a couple of weeks ago. What's really interesting, though, is from EV penetration, what you're starting to see are the areas of the country that were probably the biggest doubters over the last 5 years, primarily because they're in climates that might scare EV purchasers. We learned yesterday that every 10 degrees, when the weather drops 10 degrees, you lose a lot of battery life. But we started to see places like Pittsburgh, Rochester, Detroit. These are northern parts of the United States that had pretty significant retail registration. What I am highlighting here also is Colorado. This is Colorado Springs, Pueblo. What's real interesting about these types of marketplaces is this is where those range envy people might be living right now, and this is probably the next EV buyer that the manufacturers need to market to, only because they're starting to realize that the vehicles have better range. They're getting much more educated on sort of how to plug in, play these vehicles, and the weather is not as much of an issue as it was, say, 2 and 3 years ago. So this is a really interesting, we saw a handful of other areas within the country where all that range envy myth-busting is sort of not even a factor anymore. This is not anything, this is not a piece of work for my daughter. This is a map of charging stations by state. And you can see the East Coast and the West Coast, pretty significant. There's not if you notice on the map, there's a big opening gap there, those flyover states again. That's probably going to be the next sort of domino to fall when we get more SUVs and trucks into the marketplace and infrastructure starts kicking into gear. So there is, if any of you have been to, say, a national park, it might take 2 or 3 hours to actually get into the park. Well, that's all well and good. If you're in the middle of Yosemite and you're 3 hours into your charge, you have to charge up. And until that charging station is there, you're probably not going to be taking that car in there. So that's sort of what we work with our municipalities, government agencies, research companies, investment banks, and obviously electric companies, are all using our data to understand population density and growth and where they really need to start mapping out charging stations. I'm going to switch a little bit to give you kind of a snapshot of what's going on in the marketplace. Tesla, the Model Y and 3 are the most popular, but what we're starting to see now, and if you go down, you're going to go to the floor a little later today, there's a lot more vehicles out there. We saw Mustang started to take off this year. VW's done a great job, and you're starting to hear from Russell and a couple of folks from Nissan. A lot of vehicles, a lot of EV vehicles are coming on. Close to 60 vehicles are going to be out in the next 24 months, 23 just in this year. And one thing that we get to do at Experian is sort of identify household income trends. It's a pretty big credit profiling data point. And we started to notice that the household, this is more critical as a marketer, because household income is a big determinant as to where you're actually going to look for the next shoppers of your vehicles. We saw rapid growth across the middle income class, and that's what happened in 2020 is middle income started to sort of eclipse the high income. So think of a Tesla. It's a $96,000 vehicle. You got to have a pretty high household income to purchase that car. What we're starting to see now is that middle income class, the middle class, is starting to get a lot more vehicles that are in their set. I've kind of put these vehicle detail pages together to kind of illustrate a point. If you could see, I just picked out two, the VW and the Tesla. You now have sort of groupings of vehicles of MSRPs that sort of spread across a lot of different vehicle types. What's interesting, though, is we with our marketing services team, we get a chance to really break down that consumer, and you could see the ages in each of the vehicles. But what's really critical is we use what's called Mosaic, which is our market segmentation, and this fast track couple seems to be going across all these points of vehicle MSRPs. That's the marketplace. That's the other EV buyer that's out there right now that marketers need to be keen on. And when you're asking what the fast track couple is, it's that younger couple, very tech savvy, so an electric vehicle really doesn't scare them as much. They're comfortably spending, but they're very credit sensitive. They are the ones that actually do know their Experian credit score. More importantly, these are probably the younger families. They're probably in between the first and the second kid, and they're probably making their second house. Just in our mosaics, we have about 93 of these sort of mosaics, and there's a ton of derivatives below that. It paints a really good picture about where all these vehicles are going to go. And I think that's the challenge that the marketplace is going to have as these factories are being built and they're going for volume right now. So knowing where the next buyer is pretty critical. I'm going to leave you with this. This is a very car geeky credit kind of slide, but what it's actually describing is at the onset of Tesla coming to market, most of their vehicles, and I don't know what the number is, it's going to be over, say, 70% of Tesla vehicles were leased. All right, they were the first entrants. What you're starting to see about 2 years ago, mostly now, is sort of standard fare. People are buying EVs. That's the confidence that they have in the marketplace. So when you buy a car, the next car is usually the one you're thinking about the day after you pick up your new car. You're thinking about your next car. When you have that confidence to buy the car, that means that there's a resale value that's being held. And that's the confident level that's starting to happen in the EV market, which is critical as you guys, if you're talking to your customers, if you're a publisher, if you're an agency, or even an OEM now, household income and payment trends are really critical in the car purchasing process. So with that, like I said, I was going to be brief. Big increases. You guys have heard about EVs ad nauseum today. Tesla has dominated. There's close to 60 vehicles coming out in 24 months. Understanding the next buyer is real critical. I suggest you get with a really good consumer marketing partner to kind of get you through the next couple of years as these vehicles need to find homes. That shift from lease to loan is critical. And lastly, to stay informed, what we do at Experian, we have a handful of webinars. We have a state of automotive finance market, which for you finance nerds, it's fantastic. You get to go into the credit history of what's going on in the marketplace with all these buyers. We also do a webinar on automotive trends and registrations, which is real interesting to understand vehicles in operation and where they're landing in garages and across the country. And lastly, we're just launching this summer Automotive Consumer Insights, which is very similar to what I just kind of teased you with here. So with that, I am done. I am brief.
Brief, but excellent. Thank you, Mike. Give him a round of applause.